The Royals are reportedly still keeping an eye on the Mets' Starling Marte. Is it possible that a trade is pulled off before opening day? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find us on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That includes Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. But a reminder, just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If this is the first episode you were ever tuning into, well, of course, welcome in. We're always enjoying having new listeners here to this podcast. If you want to know about me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do a variety of things over there, different types of sports. But when it just comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And today's show is brought to you by wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Well, it's going to be back-to-back days that we are talking about somebody outside the organization, but may at some point this year, or maybe before opening day, could be joining the Kansas City Royals. Now, Adam Duvall, our story yesterday, or our episode yesterday, centered around him, and that would be a likelier option than the guy I'm about to open up the show with, because Adam Duvall is a free agent, and we're talking about the difference between $1 million and $3 million. Clearly, from the comments that we got on the page, there's not a lot of fans of Adam Duvall, and some are very much upset with the fact that he's saying, I want $2 million more or I'm going to retire. And it doesn't surprise me because most fans do get upset with players that put their foot in the ground that firmly when it comes to a dollar amount of, I'm all right retiring if one team doesn't give me $2 million more when you've already made loads of money throughout your career. So I totally understand it from that standpoint. But back to that point, Adam Duvall is somebody that is a likelier option for the Royals to still go out and add before opening day than Starling Marte is. And I'll be honest, I had written off the Starling Marte rumors about a month ago. Because if you can recall, and this was reported around the winter meetings, that the Royals and Mets were engaged in talks, or at least the initial stages of talking about a potential swap. The Royals were asking about Starling Marte for one of their corner outfield spots, and the Mets were bringing up names like Angel Serpa, Hunter Harvey, and the Royals just were not willing to give up one of those guys, even for a guy like Starling Marte, who played in 94 games last year, hit just under 270, a WRC plus and OPS plus that were 4 points above the league average. He crushed lefties at 100 at-bats. I believe it was 310 that he hit off of lefties last year. Walk rate, like Duvall, was up a little bit. You hear us bring that up almost every single time when evaluating a player. His OPS was up. Just simply put, he crushed lefties, and there's no other way around it. It wasn't 400 at-bats or something like that, but 100 is a big enough sample size where you can come up with the answer to many questions, which is he a platoon hitter? Is he an everyday guy? Does he have enough left in the tank? You just look at that number and you go, okay, he's a great platoon hitter. He would be somebody that you throw in there just against lefties, and maybe the other, 50% of the time, 60% of the time, you'd have somebody like MJ Melendez hitting in the lineup for him. But I had written off those rumors because we had gotten to spring training. The Royals still hadn't pulled off a trade. And when I spoke with JJ Piccolo, I did not get the sense that they were still actively looking for somebody to add to their everyday lineup, or at least every other day lineup, because we know how much Matt Quatraro loves to switch around the bottom of the order. You may have one guy play game one, another guy play game two, and another guy play game three. It's just the way he operates with his lineup. There are the regulars and there are the interchangeables. But now, as I'm doing this episode And the report comes out, I believe it was from Joel Sherman as well, who had broken that news about Adam Duvall and the Royals. It's not that they are gunning for Starling Marte again. But from this article, you can gather that they have not closed the door on it. And I do believe that the injuries that have happened in camp, and they aren't severe by any means, but Dairon Blanco has had this setback with the Achilles tightness. Nick Lofton has the wrist soreness. You may not want to run it back with the same three outfielders, even though Jonathan India and Michael Massey will get work out there. But there's always room to add another outfield bat, which is what they were trying to do with Duvall, which is maybe what they would still be trying to do with Starling Marte. Let me be very clear. With Duvall, there are pros and cons to him. And that is the exact same way I would describe Starling Marte. There are pros and cons to him. And in fact, one of the biggest cons is that he hasn't played in spring training yet. He's still nursing a bone bruise that is carried over from the offseason, and he's 36 years old, and he is unplayable defensively. However, when you are trying to find advantages in little margins, and you are trying to find advantages some spots in your lineup, well, maybe a move for Starling Marte where you are trading away a reliever like a Carlos Hernandez or maybe someone like a Hunter Harvey, you could get that advantage in right field. Starling Marte is not an everyday player anymore. I believe that is a unanimous feel that I have gotten from people that listen to this podcast and people that just follow the sport. He is no longer somebody you throw out there for 150, 160 games. Not just because of his age, I believe because of the durability, and I believe for the overall production. It would not be for making him the everyday right fielder or the everyday left fielder. I don't get that sense at all. And the Mets aren't asking the Royals, or what it appeared like in this article, they aren't asking for the moon. Because Starling Marte is also blocked in New York. The Mets have their three starting outfielders. Juan Soto is going to be in right field. They've got Jesse Winker, Jose Siri as well. They've got guys that can move around out there. I believe Tyrone Taylor also is in that conversation. Marte is as well. But Marte is a 36-year-old who can't really play the field anymore. But offensively, that's what I'm talking about with the advantages. Even though he only played in 94 games, this was somebody that the Mets trusted in the postseason and trusted for a chunk of the season. And offensively, he was not a bad hitter. The defense is what brought him down a lot. He is somebody that could hit 270, he could crush lefties, and he could give you anywhere from 100 to 110 games. You're not banking on him to be the everyday player in right field. And so that becomes maybe the biggest question of them all. Is it worth it for a platoon player? Is it worth it to trade away Hunter Harvey and bring in Starling Marte? Starling Marte was better than MJ Melendez, than Kyle Isbell, than Hunter Renfroe last year at the plate. Defensively, not so much. But would you be willing to make that trade to get a slight advantage at the plate? He was a slightly above average hitter in 2024. Are you willing to give up a major league reliever to make room for him? Or would you rather go with Duvall? Or would you rather say, I don't want either, and I would rather have Nelson Velasquez or Joey Weimer or Nick Prado or Drew Waters? Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And I do have mine. I would rather have a sure thing, even though Adam Duvall is 36 and Starling Marte is 36, if it didn't cost you a lot, right? Marte is in a logjam in the outfield. The Mets don't have that leverage of saying, well, we are trading away one of our starters. No, they would be trading away their fourth outfielder. And the Royals put their foot down and said, that's not worth our eighth inning guy or our seventh inning guy or our sixth inning guy. Not one with years of control, or not someone like Hunter Harvey, who we believe is going to have a huge impact for the back end of our bullpen. And again, this may not turn into anything. The report was not that the Royals are actively pursuing Starling Marte. It was stating that they have not closed the door. And that's what I'm going to be listening for, watching for. When is that door going to be closed on all of these guys? they may still be searching for. And we would be foolish to think that it's not about some of the guys that are banged up in camp. The Royals do have in-house options, but with how often Matt Quatraro moves around this lineup, you need more sure things. Last year, there was a lot of uncertainty with some guys. Like, could you say with confidence right now that if Nelson Velasquez made the team and he played in 50% of the games from April to May, you could count on him being a league average hitter or better? You couldn't say it because he's never done it, right? You could bring up those, 40 games in 2023 when the Royals were on pace for 106 losses and finished with that. Yeah, he was able to hit with power and transform the middle of that order. It was just in meaningless baseball. This is not meaningless baseball anymore. These are games that are going to matter from the start. And the Royals, I believe, are trying to get some insurance if MJ Melendez starts cold, Hunter Renfroe starts cold or isn't durable, to give some protection to Kyle Isbell where he doesn't need to be looked at as the everyday center fielder. He's got to play there all the time. But you run the risk, if you trade for those guys, to play devil's advocate on myself, right? If Adam Duvall comes in and he plays like he did last year, you can only throw him out there against lefties. He's 36. He's a average to below average defender. He hits 182, right? A well below average hitter when facing both righties and lefties. Like, is that worth it for $3 million? I know a lot of people yesterday said no. And I would agree with that statement. It's not worth $3 million. It's barely worth $1 million. For Starling Marte, you might be able to get better production in right field, but for how long? He only played 94 games last year. He's dealing with this bone bruise. That might be able to open up the door for a lesser trade where you can acquire him for somebody you were already going to outright or DFA. That's always possible. And the Mets would have to pay down. I probably should have brought that up earlier on in this segment. The Mets will have to pay a chunk of that salary that he's owed. And that's why they're asking for more than just a Carlos Hernandez or somebody that's not going to make the roster. That goes into it a little bit. If you want Starling Marte, we're going to need to have one of your high leverage relievers. And I can already tell what the feeling is going to be like in the comments after this episode is posted. You're not going to want Starling Marte. He's old. He's bad defensively. He's not durable. But the options are limited out there. When it comes to my opinion, I would rather have a sure thing. And if that means Adam Duvall on a one-year deal, a $1 million deal, and you play him against lefties and you get him in 80 to 85 games, so be it. I believe there could be some small advantages there between the margins. You could have something there. With Marte, you ask 100 games out of him, okay, he's only going to play against lefties. Let's see if he can crush him then. And if you give up Hunter Harvey, who has a better chance of impacting the team? Harvey in New York in that bullpen or Marte in right field as a platoon hitter? Everybody's going to have their opinions, some stronger than others, but that's where I'm at right now. We'll see if the Royals have closed the door completely, if that report that they're keeping an eye on him is really not much. They're just saying, oh, if they're willing to take Carlos Hernandez from Marte, we'll be willing to listen again. But if they're not, then we have closed that door. All those things will be factored in, and we're getting down to it now. Tomorrow, it'll be exactly 3 weeks, I believe, from opening day when the Royals will take on the Cleveland Guardians. We will be out there, so still 3 weeks to go, but that can be a lot of time when you're talking about offseason plans. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, Jeff Passan had a pretty interesting article about 10 players that have scouts buzzing in camp. One Royal made that list. I don't believe you'll be surprised who was said in this article. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jac Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our one and only sponsor today in Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. So today, go get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Again, that is wonderfulpistachios.com to go and learn more. The next segment is going to be dedicated to another article that was out there this morning. It came from the great Jeff Passan. Anytime he puts something out there on ESPN, you know everybody's going to be reading it. And this one caught my eye because there were 10 players that have generated some serious buzz among scouts, and I had wondered if anybody in the Royals camp had made their way onto the list. And lo and behold, there was one Royal that made their way onto the list, and it was Jac Caglianone. And I guess when I was looking at the article in the first go-around, just saw the headline, saw who wrote it, I'd imagine that Jac Caglianone, with his 115-mile-an-hour home run that he had early on in camp, he had a chance to be on this list. So I might take a few steps back and say I wasn't completely surprised, but pleasantly surprised that Jac Caglianone was getting referenced in this article where it's just 10 players. And this is big leaguers and minor leaguers. Just 10 players in camp that are generating some serious buzz. But what's intriguing about this piece is that Jeff Passan goes on to say that there is a logjam at first base with the Royals. They play Vinny Pasquantino there, and they play Salvador Perez. But Caglianone will get outfield reps this year and could find himself playing in a corner, accelerating that timeline for his big league debut to perhaps as soon as this summer. I put it out there on Twitter. A lot of people get excited about it. How can you not? You're hearing from a very reputable source that the Royals will try him out in the outfield at the minor league level. And if things are going well, we could see him in Kansas City as early as this summer. Not in September for the call-ups. We are talking about a true fast track to the big leagues. I want to provide context to this because simply jumping into this and saying, yeah, it could happen. If Jac Caglianone goes down there and hits 400, he's going to be in Kansas City. I do believe that to be the case, but it would be foolish to lead everybody astray and say that's what's expected of him. The Royals know he's going to go down there and hit 400, and they're going to get him up by June. That's not reality here. When I spoke to J.J. Piccolo down in camp, he had given off the impression of, we're not rushing him. There is no need to rush him with the state of our big league roster, and we also need to see if we're going to be in it. If the Royals are not in it by June and July, they're 10, 15 games under 500, it makes zero sense to call up Jac Caglianone, even if he is thrashing AA and AAA pitching. Because Jac Caglianone, 15 games back, is not going to solve all of your issues and put you over the hump. It almost has to be this perfect storm of he is playing his ass off, he is playing good enough defensively in a corner outfield spot, and number 3, the Royals are in a playoff hunt. And if you want to throw in a bonus little tidbit here, the Royals offense needs to be thriving when they call him up. I am one of those baseball enjoyers that when evaluating prospects, I hate to view them as the solution to the big league level. I bring up this example many times when talking about Jac Caglianone and prospects, that Vinny Pasquantino was tearing it up in AAA and Carlos Santana was struggling in Kansas City back in 2022. And you had people with pitchforks going, why is Vinny not in Kansas City? They are manipulating service time and they're doing this and that, but they didn't want Vinny Pasquantino to get called up and be seen as the savior. You were the reason the offense wasn't, turning on. You were the reason the offense wasn't catching fire. Now you're here. It should all be solved from this point on. That's a lot of pressure to put on a 22, 23-year-old guy. I mean, Bobby Witt Jr. got called up, and even it took him a little bit of time to get his feet wet, get comfortable, and be the star of that team. It wasn't instantaneous, and it's not going to be that way with Jac Caglianone. So those 4 pieces are vital for this working out in the way that every fan out there, every Royals fan, I should say, is wanting it to. You want him to go down there and hit 350. That's got to be step 1. He keeps hitting like that. Now you can have that conversation of, Let's move him from first base and see what he looks like in right field and left field. He's athletic enough. He could have the arm to hang out there. And there's going to be spots open in Kansas City in right field and maybe in left field. Number 3, if the Royals are 10 to 15 games over 500, now we've checked off 3 boxes. And number 4, are we playing well right now? Well, the perfect piece to add around the deadline would be our number 1 prospect that can hit the ball 550 feet. But here's the context I do want to bring up because I teased it a little bit and then went away from it. They're not going to rush him, and I put it out there on Twitter. You can always follow me at JohnnyJ_15. But Wyatt Langford, I believe, is the perfect comparison when talking about fast-tracking a college hitter. It just so happens that Wyatt Langford played at Florida and Jac Caglianone played at Florida, both in the SEC, of course, and they're facing elite pitching in conference play. They're not coming from a mid-major program and then getting shell-shocked once they come to the pros. SEC players play big-time talent. They face first-round picks. Right? Jac Caglianone faced a guy who was picked right after him in Hagen Smith. Or it might have been right before him, now that I think about it. But he had faced Arkansas. They face LSU. They face Vanderbilt. They face guys who are going to have successful big league careers. And Wyatt Langford, in total, played 47 minor league games. Just 47. But in those 47 games, Wyatt Langford slashed 351, 469, and had a slug of 649. OPS, of course, well north of 1,000. You are talking about a near 500 OBP in almost 50 games at the minor league level. That was good enough for the Rangers to go, he's ready. We don't need to mess around with AA and AAA and make sure he's got the confidence. No, that tells me that he can hit at any level. And it worked out for Texas. And I would use the same measuring tool when looking at Jac Caglianone. If Jac Caglianone goes to Northwest Arkansas and hits 350 with a near 500 OBP in the first 50 games, you can start fast-tracking him to the big leagues, or at least having the conversation. Maybe start playing him in right field 30 games in when he's hitting 380. That would be fine by me. But if he's doing anything less than that, if he's hitting 300 in AA, and I'm not saying average is everything and OBP is everything, but he truly has to make a mockery of AA. He has to make a joke out of AAA to pull the trigger on this. Because as J.J. Piccolo said, and even as Jeff Passan said in this article, there is no need to rush him. You have a competent first baseman, and Salvador Perez is behind him at first base. You can play Hunter Renfroe in right field and platoon with MJ Melendez and have Jonathan India in left. That can work out on a playoff team. But I'm not going to fight the Royals, and the Royals certainly wouldn't hold him down. If we get to July and we're approaching that deadline, and Jac Caglianone's doing what Wyatt Langford did in AA and AAA, I don't need to see anymore. I would like to see him in Kansas City's lineup, and per Jeff Passan's article, there is a possibility of that. He'll get some reps in the outfield, but first things first, he's got to prove that offensively, he doesn't need to be messing around in AA or AAA. That bat needs to be in the big leagues. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, 3 articles we're talking about today, and the third one is from Jim Bowden of The Athletic. He actually has the Royals winning the American League Central after having a B grade this offseason. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jac Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. It has been a flurry of articles that we've gone over and getting the opinions of Jeff Passan, getting the opinions of Joel Sherman, and now Jim Bowden, who writes for The Athletic. And he put out a piece, I want to say it was either early this morning or last night, about the offseason grades for every single team out there. And it ranges from an A+ all the way down to an F. And it was the St. Louis Cardinals who had an F, and it was the Los Angeles Dodgers, of course, who got a high-ranking A grade. And for the Royals, middle of the pack. They get a B per Jim Bowden with the additions of Michael Wacha, Carlos Estevez, and Michael Lorenzen, and then also trading for Jonathan India and Joey Wiemer. He calls that Jonathan India was the best move because he gives them a leadoff hitter who can get on base and create traffic for the middle of their lineup, including Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, and Vinny Pasquantino. The Royals struck out the least of any AL team last season and should repeat that feat again this year. He calls the Carlos Estevez move the under-the-radar move because it allows Lucas Erceg to move into that the fireman role. Said the middle of the order spot, but more of that fireman role. And then what helped or hurt their grade, he said, I'm a little concerned about their starting pitching depth and would like to see them acquire another starter, such as free agent Kyle Gibson. And the storyline to watch was who's going to play second base, third base, DH, and left field on a daily basis. And with India, Michael Massey, Michael Garcia, and MJ Melendez, among others involved, how much platooning will they do at those positions? But his season prediction is that the Royals will win the American League Central with that B grade. This will be a common take, I'd imagine, around baseball because the Royals were one of those surprise teams last year. They have an MVP candidate in Bobby Witt Jr. They have strengthened the bullpen. Their rotation is set to be, top 5 in the American League once again. And even though they didn't add the true middle of the order bat that we were all expecting, they had Jonathan India. You're hoping for a bounce back from a handful of guys at the bottom of the order. But when you have an MVP candidate hitting in the 2-hole and you have 2 guys that can drive in runs like Vinny Pasquantino and Salvador Perez, then I would say that they would be a likely pick for a lot of people to win the division. Not so much because the Royals embody a division winner. They haven't won this division very often. But the American League Central continues to be wide open. It is almost a carbon copy of what the National League Central is. The National League Central with the Cubs and the Brewers and the Cardinals and the Pirates, those teams interchange, it feels like, every single year. With the Central, it's the exact same thing. The American League Central, I should say. But with it being wide open, with the rest of the Central being rather quiet, it has opened the door for the Royals to slide past Cleveland and slide past Detroit and Minnesota to be that top dog. And if you ask people around baseball what gives you the best chance to win a division, well, you got to have great starting pitching. And I know the Mariners have great starting pitching. They didn't win the division last year, but you start it with that strong staff. It takes less pressure off the offense. Because in my opinion, you're going to win a lot of those games that are decided within 5 runs than you are to win a lot of shootouts. Like if you gave me the odds of a team winning a 2-1 game compared to a 9-8 game, it might matter how your lineup is constructed. But if you had the Royals play 10 games in a row and all of those games were decided in double digits, or it was 9-8 or 8-7, I would not enjoy the Royals' chances going up against some of those slugging offenses. But you give them a lot of these games that are 3-2, 2-1. I like the low scoring because the Royals value the pitching and the defense, and it takes pressure off an offense that's so top heavy. Right? You have some of those slugging teams out there. They say, we don't have great pitching. Put us up against the Yankees or put us up against the Dodgers and let's have a home run derby. Let's have a slugfest, right? I view the Texas Rangers as a team that has a scary offense. They got a lot of guys who can mash. Their rotation can be good, but if it's not healthy, they become that type of team where it's, I'm going to outslug everybody. They've got a lot of heavy hitters in that lineup. But to win a division, how many times over the course of 162 are you playing those 3-2 games, those 2-1 games? You're playing a lot of them. You're not playing many 9-8 games. So starting with the starting pitching and defense, it gives you that upper hand to win those close, low-scoring games. Your team might be tailored to win those tight games. And the Royals have done a good job in making sure that bullpen is going to be able to lock down those games. You might make the postseason or miss it simply for how you fare in those one-run games. Now, you get lucky sometimes and have an onslaught and score 10, 11, 12 runs, and you never have to worry about it. But there's a lot of tight games, especially against Cleveland, especially against Detroit, where it's a low-scoring game. And you might need to hold an offense down for the final 4 innings. Right? You're hitting, you're crushing the ball, and you got no starting rotation. See how often that's going to keep up. See if you can maintain that over 162. And that's what it's going to come down to for me, is in those tight 3-2 games, in those 2-1 games, who's the best in the Central at that? Cleveland was really good at it last year because of that bullpen. It's a big reason why they won the division. Detroit became very good at that when they went on their stretch runs. The Royals were bad at that at the first half of the season. Then they got better with that bullpen, but they had to squeak into the postseason in that final series thanks to a Minnesota collapse. But they were not always great with that bullpen in the first half at holding on to leads late. Now, if your offense only puts up 3, 4, 5 runs a game, you got to rely on that starting pitching. And with Jim Bowden, I believe it's because of that starting pitching, because the bullpen has gotten better, and you have an MVP candidate. The rest of the Central, there might need to be more things happening for them to win the division. It's crazy to say that about the Royals because they're not a team that finds themselves in the top 3 spots in September. But there's expectations now, and these guys certainly know it. But with having the rotation, still including Cole Reagans, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, you bring back Lorenzen, Chris Bubic can elevate them, and the bullpen has more of a solidified back 3. That makes you feel better about this team getting close to that 85 to 90 win mark again. And offensively, you feel good about the top 4. What can that bottom 5 give you? Can 2 of those guys turn into offensive contributors? That is going to be a question that we revisit almost every single month. What are those bottom 5 guys in the lineup giving you? Because we know the top 4 are going to do their job. Which of those bottom 5 guys will do enough? Because I believe, along with the rotation, along with the bullpen, 2 of those guys have to perform if the Royals are going to pull through and win the American League Central, as Jim Bowden predicts. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jac Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, I know we've been talking about new things every single day because they're popping up the morning of, but I do promise to give you my thoughts on some guys that I've switched up on and if they're going to make the roster or not. But until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.